Welcome to another episode of Distory. My name is Kirk from Lewis Carroll, and tonight we are going to do the first part of a three-part series about Alice in Wonderland, the ride in Disneyland. Tonight we are going to focus on the book, the film, and the original walkthrough attraction before we get the physical attraction in 1958. We'll have two more parts. One will be the ride in 1958, and the last part will be the ride that existed from 1983 all the way through the 2014 refurbishment and where we stand today. With me, as always, is the Disney Cicerone, Kate. How are we doing this evening, Kate?
Oh, I'm doing so great. I'm very excited for this series. I feel like we've talked about this one for a while, knowing that it was like, it's a must-do, especially considering you are Walrus Carp, which stands for
Walrus Carpenter.
Yeah.
But by the way, in my research, I found a bunch of model sheets and cells, and I don't know which ones are like authenticated, but I'm like, these aren't that expensive. I feel like nobody cares about the Walrus and the Carpenter. I might be able to scoop these up cheap.
Well, I don't know if those are authentic then. Usually
they're real.
Pretty spendy.
They're real, Kate. Don't lie to me.
They're probably facsimiles of the originals, but they're sorry.
Kate,
I'm sorry.
Kate, I got them on AliExpress. I think they're real. They were 27 cents, and I have to wait 4 months for shipping. It said Walter Elijah to me. I felt like it might have been off, but Disney brother on his. Okay, so let's get into it tonight. We're talking Alice in Wonderland movie, book. What?
Yeah.
What are all these things?
Well, I feel like to start this off, I just want to give a little quote about Walt Disney and how he felt about Alice in general, the story of Alice in Wonderland, before we get into kind of where it comes from. So I have this great quote from Walt Disney. He said, "No story in English literature has intrigued me more than Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. It fascinated me the first time I read it as a schoolboy, and as soon as I possibly could after I started making animated cartoons, I acquired the film rights to it." So he has had a love of Alice in Wonderland his whole life, except not always. So we'll get into that in a few minutes. So do you want to talk a little bit about the book?
Well, you know what? Even before the book, right? So originally, we had some animated features with the Alice stories, right? So like that even happened before. I mean, yes, Walt Disney read the book and the book came before all of these things, but there is an origin and a history that even starts before we even get into the film's ideation.
Right.
But the story, I feel like we've talked a little bit, maybe during the Mad Tea Party series. I feel like we talked about Lewis Carroll, but the book series itself, there was two different sections that went through the stories of Alice falling down the rabbit hole and how she follows the white rabbit through a multitude of different things. It's a lot more graphic. It has a lot more characters. And in fact, if you're a big fan of Tim Burton, I feel like those films are more accurately portraying what the stories that Lewis Carroll had written, because there's a lot of nonsense in here. There's also a lot of politics. There's also a lot of religious commentary that all happens in Lewis Carroll's book.
Yeah, so it was published in an 1865 novel, but it actually there was a version of that before there was Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which was what was published in 1865. So the inspiration for Alice in Wonderland what happened on the 4th of July in 1862, which was known as the Golden Afternoon, when Lewis Carroll and Reverend Robinson Duckworth rode up the Isis on a boat trip from Oxford to Godstow, with the three young daughters of Lewis Carroll's friend Henry Little. So those Lorena Charlotte, Alice Pleasance, and Edith Mary were the three girls that were with him. So during the trip, Carroll told the girls a story, and he described it in his diary as Alice's Adventures Underground, which his journal says he undertook to write out for Alice. So Alice basically asked him to write the stories down for her, and then she finally received the manuscript more than 2 years later. So this is what Alice's Adventures Underground looks like. I actually have a copy of it.
Oh, that's cool.
1965, they made a copy of, they literally photocopied his journal with his original illustrations in it. And it looks a little bit different than the Tenniel ones, which we'll get into in a little bit. But he has lots of really interesting illustrations in this one. So this one is Alice's Adventures Underground, which was published in 1864. And then in 1865, he made a version that's almost twice as long that's called Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which is the one that we know and love by Lewis Carroll. So
when I was a kid, the origins of Walrus Carp, it comes from a poem that was written in this book called The Walrus and the Carpenter. So I just dropped the back half of Carpenter and it became Walrus Carp. The reason why I fell in love with this story was way before Walt Disney. We had a copy that was similar to this that was illustrated. So as a kid in our very small cabinet library, it was one of the books that we had. And when I first started reading larger books and larger volumes, this was one of the ones that I would pick up from time to time. It was easier because it was illustrative as having larger words as well. So it was really fascinating to read as a kid. And what's weird, and I'm sure you have experiences like that. I can still remember what it smelled like in my parents' study reading this book late. It's very strange to have those kind of. Yeah, I bet. I swear I probably have that book somewhere, but it's probably in storage because I looked for it today and I didn't have it anywhere close and accessible.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed looking through Alice's Adventures Underground. It's interesting how different some of these characters are, especially even from the Disney version we know. I have a few notes on some scenes from the published version of the book from 1865 that we don't see in Disney. There's a lot of them, but these are just a couple of examples. I do also want to mention that the Mad Hatter Tea Party was not in Adventures Underground. It was only in that 1865 version. And that's when the Hatter explains that it's always 6 p.m. tea time, claiming that time is standing still as punishment for the Hatter trying to do away with it. So that is why he's stuck in this eternal tea time, because he is trying to do away with time. That is why he is stuck in that tea party, which I think is really interesting.
There's a poem inside the novel that's called The Jabberwocky. And Alice is being taught this poem, and Humpty Dumpty is sitting next to her at the time that she's hearing this. And there's a section that actually mentions "'twas brilling." And "'twas brilling" means "'twas," because there was an apostrophe right before it. So "'twas brilling." Brilling, according to Humpty Dumpty, was 4 p.m. in the afternoon, which was the time that you should be broiling your dinner. So it was grilling was broiling time. So it was brilling, and the Slithy Toves. So it's 4 p.m. and the Slithy Toves were slimy and lithe together, which meant that they were. This is ridiculous. And then the Toves part were badgers and lizards. So imagine slimy, lively badger lizards at 4 p.m.
Gross.
According to Humpty Dumpty. It realistically, all of it means nothing. But I do think that it's interesting that we do get, from the author himself, "'twas brilling." Brilling means that it's 4 p.m. So from here on out, anytime I tell you to meet at 4 p.m., I will say,
"Brilling?
'Twas brilling."
'Twas brilling. Well, Jabberwocky, I think, was also written kind of like in Old English too. Like its original format in the book looks very bizarre when you try to read it. So
the whole book is bizarre in a lot of ways, but it's really fascinating. Sure. It's like a stranger, more British version of Gulliver Travels.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He also wrote the poem in it. There's a preface to Alice. That is how it starts. It's all in the golden afternoon. And so there's I won't read the whole thing because it's like a ton of stanzas, but if go look up that poem, because it's really interesting to give a read to that and kind of see how those influences, I think it influenced the beginning of the film more than anything for that poem. But a couple other scenes that we don't see in the Disney version that were in this 1865 one. Alice arrives at the home of a duchess, not the White Rabbit, who owns a perpetually grinning Cheshire cat The Duchess's baby, whom she hands to Alice, then transforms into a piglet, which Alice releases into the woods. So, like, what was it? The original book, I think, shows her holding a pig. Here, I've got it. So this is, sorry.
The Duchess's baby.
It's the Duchess's baby, so she's holding a pig. And I was... So that's a little bit different than what we see. I think she goes, to the White Rabbit's house, right? Is what we see, not the Duchess's house.
In the original, yeah. She doesn't, the Duchess isn't even utilized in the story at all.
That's true. And so then also the Cheshire Cat appears only as a head, and the Queen orders his beheading, only to be told that such an act is impossible, which I think is funny.
As he only has a head. He's got no body.
He's already beheaded-ish. I don't know. I was like, he's lost his body.
He's beheaded-ish. I like that.
Beheaded-ish.
That's the word. I mean, Lewis Carroll made up words. Why can't we? Same with Dr. Seuss. Just make up whatever you want.
And I also have Alice meets a griffin and a weeping mock turtle who danced to the lobster quadrille while Alice recites rather incorrectly, "'Tis the voice of the lobster." And the mock turtle sings them beautiful soup, during which the griffin drags Alice away for an impending trial in which the Knave of Hearts stands accused for stealing the Queen's tarts. So a little bit different. And it's the Knave of Hearts instead of, so really interesting.
You gotta eat, a Knave of Hearts has gotta eat. There's now we do get, it's interesting, right? Because like certain parts, we do get the dodo. So remember, we had talked about how there's like some governmental overtones. Well, first of all, the Duchess giving birth to a pig. Like if that's not like a royal knockdown, right. I don't know what is. We also get a caucus race, which is very confusing because in American politics, we have caucuses, and caucuses are races, and they're typically for one party race. So it would be like who's going to be the party leader or the presidential elect would be a caucus race for the Republican or the Democratic Party. So it's like the caucus would be like the initial part of trying to select who that person is. It's like, so it's funny to see in the film, because no kid would ever get this, that in a caucus race, all they're doing is running around a dodo, never going anywhere and never getting dry. But the dodo's the one who's up higher than all of them, dressed like British nobility, even with that like powdered wig ponytail, as he's drying himself, and all of the lobsters and little critters are dancing below getting washed. And then Alice rides like a pelican into the woods. Just a normal day. The insanity of that, they're doing the same thing over and over again, and it's never going to end, and it's this eternal cycle of crazy. I think it's such an interesting commentary. I think we got it right back then, and we're continuing to do that now, so why not, right? I think I think a lot of people don't really notice that. They just think like, oh, they're having like a fun little race on the beach. Nay. Round and round we go.
So shall we move on to from the book to the beginning of Walt's fascination with Alice in the comedies? So in 1922, Walt Disney created a live-action animated short that's called Alice's Wonderland, which was actually a reverse take on Max Fleischer's Out of the Inkwell series, which had an animated character in a live-action world. You can actually see him like sketching a character, and then it like becomes animated as he's sketching it, but it's his real hand. So Walt kind of like flipped that on its end, and he had a live action character that was immersed in this animated world, which, is such an early thing that we do see later on become very popular with Mary Poppins and whatnot, but it's fun to watch. This was like the beginning of it. Walt, the film launched a multi-year series, which was, and he had 57 Alice comedies altogether, which were theatrical shorts, not based on any of Carroll's writings, really. It just kind of had the name, and it had a lot of crazy things happen. So that's probably the only connection we have there between the two.
His infatuation with going down the rabbit hole is this concept that your mind can take you to places that you never believed were possible in these fantasy locations. And I think that's really the illustrative purpose of that. You know, a lot of people say that Walt Disney had just massive success, but he was always on the forefront of innovation when it came to entertainment, both in a visual format and in a practical format with the eventual theme parks. It's pretty impressive to see how many innovations the Walt Disney animators and then eventually the Imagineers and Wed folks came up with. It's
It is incredibly innovative. They were pioneers in so many ways in animation. And I mean, I've talked about this before with like this Bambi, for example, how they used lacquer on the cells in like varying rings to make the water look like it's dropped, and then the rings are spreading out in the water. Like they use the bile of an Asian ox for Tinkerbell's wings to make them glow. They just like, who thinks of that? Like, just out here, like, I'll just try some bile of an Asian ox today to see if it works.
I feel like that's. I feel like Raleigh Crump's Museum of the Weird fits really well with Asian ox bile.
Yeah, well, no,
it's a pretty normal thing.
Anyway, so back to the Alice comedies. Walt looked into making Alice in Wonderland into a feature film in 1933 starring Mary Pickford, but he dropped the idea after Paramount Pictures released a Norman MacLeod directed live-action version with an animated Walrus and Carpenter sequence animated by Harman Ising's studio. So he decided to not go that direction and instead decided to focus on making Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs for their animation feature debut, which of course released in 1937. But, however, he did make a Mickey Mouse cartoon in 1936 that was called Through the Mirror, which was based on Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. You can see Mickey, and he's with all of the decks of cards. And this is definitely, I think, an early inspiration for the scene that we see in Alice with all of the cards soldiers, because there's a lot of interaction with the cards. And they do kind of, they do harass Mickey. At first it's cute, and then it becomes kind of threatening to him. And I think that's... And then there is also kind of a queen or king, rather, who he has an interaction with as well. So this is a really great one to go check out if you're a big fan of Alice and you want to see some early inspirations of Disney with some Through the Looking Glass.
That's really cool. You definitely see them because they cut the cards multiple times. And then even the shuffling, there's not that much undulating in that animated sequence. You know, you're talking about maybe like a 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch, where we see them actually doing a more like a bridged arch, like fan out. It's pretty cool the way that they do it in the animated version. You know, It's much more complex than that, but I didn't know that even existed. Now I got some homework to do.
Yeah, 1936 is called Through the Mirror. So instead of Through the Looking Glass, Through the Mirror. So this was, I think Walt was always kind of looking for ways to include the stories of Lewis Carroll into things that he was doing. I don't think he really gave up on the idea of a film, but he was kind of like, well, they just released a live action Alice. Like, this is not a good time to be doing this because my competitor's doing it. So he went a different direction instead. So, he started making the animated film. He started making an Alice-inspired animated feature after Snow White, but then shelved it because he didn't like the story reels that he started seeing. And around the same time, Walt Disney opened up his studio for the government to come in and basically set up camp in Walt Disney Studios, and then they made a whole bunch of propaganda films for World War II for the USA. So that was the majority of his animators in his studio was dedicated to supporting the war effort in that time. But then after the war, he started to think about Alice again, and he had none other than Aldous Huxley write a script for him in 1945. And if you thought maybe you didn't hear that right, no, you did. The author of Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, wrote a script for him. It starred Charles Dobson, which is the real name of Lewis Carroll, in it as well. And it was a 31 pages of script that he wrote. So Huxley's wife, Maria, called it the first movie he ever liked doing, which I think is interesting. Disney commissioned Huxley to write a treatment for Alice for $7,500, which was delivered to Disney Studios on November 23rd of 1945. Huxley described Alice as temporarily an orphan at the mercy of a governess and an old man who did not truly understand or love her. When she was locked in the garden house, she imagined objects that were characters, like a piece of rope becoming a caterpillar and a stuffed tiger becoming the Cheshire Cat. So yeah, she gets locked in a shed essentially, and then like kind of hallucinates all this stuff. And that was his version of the script. But Alice even says her system of overcoming fear is pretending to be in Wonderland. So is her like way of brain escaping her situation, which is kind of dark, quite honestly.
It reminds me of Return to Oz, and I wish they made it.
Yeah, for sure. So the script was obviously never used, as Walt Disney thought it too literary for their purposes. So I mean, go figure. Aldous Huxley late bird in a house fire in 1961, so we don't have the full script. The 14-page treatment and 31-page script Huxley presented to Disney is still in the Walt Disney Archives. So, and there are places where you can read good portions of it online. And it's wild. I'll say that. So after that, Disney thought that maybe live action was just not the right direction for the film, and animation would work better with the whimsical feel of the book. Walt said, practically everyone who has read and loved the Book of Necessity sees the tennial Alice, and no matter how closely we approximate her with a living Alice, I feel the result would be a disappointment. So he wrote that letter to a fan in New Jersey. I don't think we've shown the tennial Alice yet. Should we?
Sure.
Show a few images of that, just so we know. That's John Tenniel, who was the illustrator. I have one of the White Rabbit here. These are probably going to look familiar to you if you're an Alice in Wonderland fan. But these are all the original illustrations from that 1865 novel.
If you've ever seen somebody use any of these images in, designs, T-shirts, like you could totally print this right now if you wanted, because it's completely in Creative Commons. So all of this stuff is fair game.
Wait, go back.
Yeah. Oh, which one?
Go back to the Alice with the. There you go.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
I'm skipping ahead just a quick second just to show you this is one of the pieces of animation from the film, and you can kind of see how closely this actually does pull from that tennial Alice for the Disney version. So just thought while we had that one up.
No, that's cool.
Yeah.
Here he is. If you want to see the old bugger.
Charles Dobson himself. So at this point, he's thinking like, let's go in an animation direction, right? And Walt Disney was very inspired by Mary Blair's bold color styling. We've talked about Mary Blair, I think, a few times before. Mary Blair got her bold color. She didn't really start experimenting with color until she went on that 1941 trip down to South America. That was a Goodwill ambassador tour with Walt Disney and his animators. She tagged along for the ride and did a whole bunch of sketching and painting and all these things of all the bright colors she saw in South America. And that is when her colors kind of came to life. So Mary Blair, Claude Coates, John Hench, Ken Anderson, and Don DeGrady teamed up to do color and styling for the Alice we know and love. And I do feel like we need to talk about Mary Blair a little bit because it's so critical to the overall look at this. You're showing some pictures there of Mary's work. She was known for these Disney films. She would just go and like paint like hundreds of these little tiny, storyboard size paintings, just hundreds of them to get the style and feel for things. And it was kind of like a mid-century modern design. It had very like, what's the word I'm looking for? Angular, blocky, like it had bold colors and color blocking, I think is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and high contrast too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But her art is fantastic. And I mean, I just kept saving these because I was like, they're just so lovely. And you can see how closely they pulled for the film directly from her art. There's some of it that just is so evocative of specific scenes in the film. And that was because Walt Disney loved Mary's style. And he was always like, for Alice, he said, or for Cinderella, he said, we need more Mary. We need more Mary, because his animators got really jealous of her, upset that they had to follow a woman. Sad to say, those were the times. It was 40s and 50s. they were sad they had to follow a woman and what she was doing. But her style was so iconic and unique that it became like Disney's house style, which really was just Mary Blair. And I will say that Mary Blair, she did not have an easy life. Her private life was really, really tough. And I will say, little trigger warning, there was domestic stuff that happened in her life. Her husband was an alcoholic who also worked at the studio. So a lot of her art was an escape from what was going on in her life. And she made a lot of these like innocent characters and innocent things that would, you know, it was so evocative, I think, of where she wanted to be, like escaping her situation and making in these beautiful worlds full of color and innocence and joy. And I think that just gives so much more context to her work. Is that a pillow? What are you holding?
Yeah, this is a pillow. This was I don't know if you were a fan, but they had a whole entire Mary Blair treatment that just came out for, I think it was one of the anniversaries. I forget the year for anniversary, but yeah, they had lots of flatware and dishes and a pillow.
I got the salt and pepper shaker. It's downstairs. Look at this one. Look at his head. Woo. The Cheshire Cat.
That reminds me of Labyrinth when they're all pulling their heads off. Oh, it used to scare me so much as a kid, but
I did find some walrus in the Carpenter ones too. I don't know if you've seen these, but this one I think is pretty fun.
Oh, I love that one. Look at what he's about to eat.
And a little bit of fish I should up later on in this episode. So keep in mind that and then there's a little walrus with all the little oysters kind of guiding them through the water there. So lots of oysters. There's literally hundreds of these. Oh, so cute.
I got a little oyster. Look at him.
It's adorable. So anyway, yeah, the whole concept is that he loved Mary Blair's style, worked with the backgrounds of the movie are largely done by Claude Coates, but a lot of the actual styling itself is very much Mary Blair influenced. But John Hench was also a color expert as well. So we'll throw him in the mix. I have feelings about John Hench because he was kind of not a nice guy in general. He was smart and intelligent and artistic, but he wasn't like a great person to hang out with. Anyway, so they started doing this animation process. Do you want to talk about any of this animation? You had model sheets and things like that because I didn't want to.
No, please. I honestly, when it comes, you're doing great, Kate.
I don't want to leave you behind. So
yeah, please. I'm along for the ride.
There's the Walrus model sheet. So if those of you who don't know what model sheets are for animation, they're basically something that the main animator of the character will create that is the style reference for all the other animators. This is how you want to style this character, because you think of everybody has their own kind of personal style, right? As an artist, but you want the film to look consistent. So they created these model sheets so that all the other animators made sure the character looked consistent throughout the film. So you can see Alice here, give the animators the best chance of making sure that these look uniform throughout the whole film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love this one because it actually does use a traditional blocking for the walrus. So you can see basic construction, as they put it, standard costume. He always carries a cane and sometimes a cigar, and then comparative size with the carpenter. But I just love the deconstructed. He almost looks like you would know the short with the ghosts. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Lonesome Ghosts.
Right? Doesn't that look like one of the Lonesome Ghosts almost?
Very much so, yes.
Yeah.
Of course, the animation for this film was a little bit different than some of the other films that they worked on. It was a really tedious process, and the animators actually didn't enjoy working on Alice, partially because they felt like Alice was a really cold character, not very sympathetic character. They didn't understand. She kind of got herself into trouble herself. She was making the choices.
Don't we all?
In trouble. So they really struggled with this one. Walt even asked why it was taking so much time to get this done. And it was simply because it just wasn't fun for the animators. It wasn't a fun process for them. And everybody felt relief when it was done. And Walt vowed never again to undertake a tamper-proof classic. So it's interesting because before it released, Walt had this sense of optimism. Okay, so this is a quote from April 1951. Before it was released in July. And he said, "Everything is looking swell here at the plant. Alice is just about ready to be wrapped up, and I think it's about as good as can be done with it. I think it's going to be an exciting show. While it does have the tempo of a three-ring circus, it still has plenty of entertainment." That was his kind of sentiment before it opened. However, when it opened on July 28th of 1951, the film tanked at the box office. It lost $100 million. It erased the success of Cinderella. They had tried to, and Walt was just like, is this how it's always going to be? Like for every win, I have like a massive loss. Like that was his sentiment at that time. He was like, I can't get ahead, which I feel like we've all felt that way. So there is very humanizing, I think, of Walt Disney. He tried to please millions who expected an entertaining show from Disney while also trying to appease the traditionalists. In the end, he did neither, and he just failed completely. It really had mixed reviews in the U.S., but he had a lot of harsh criticism from those who were huge Lewis Carroll and British film critics, Lewis Carroll fans and British film critics, because they were accused him of Americanizing the classic work of British literature. Walt then said, so of course, after released, he said, the film lacked heart. He said, we just didn't feel a thing, but we're forcing ourselves to do it. And he said, I got trapped into making it against my better judgment, and it was a terrible disappointment. I always liked the Tenniel illustrations in Alice, but I never exactly died laughing over the story. It's terribly tough to transfer whimsy to the screen. So you could tell he's just kind of...
He's defeated. He's financially... I feel, do you think he felt that way before the film was released? Or did he think that it was creatively a success and then financially a failure? Because he uses a lot of finances to judge successes.
I think, here's what I think. As a creative person, I think we usually can have a sense about if something creatively is like, it's gonna go. I feel good about this and I'm gonna put it out there. And I feel like he didn't have that feeling before it got released, but he's like, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just like, maybe it's great. Maybe it's fine. Like it's got all these elements to it that should be good, right? It's got a great story in general. It's got all these wonderful, beautiful color styling of Mary Blair. So I feel like he was doubting, but he was like hopeful maybe it would be okay, even though he's creatively not feeling it. And then all of the things that he probably felt internally, this is all speculation, like all the things he felt internally were confirmed by the numbers at the box office. And he's like, okay, yep, I shouldn't have done this. And he was regretting it.
Yeah. I think you're probably on the money there.
Yeah. And I feel like we all have that as creatives. Like not everything we do is successful all the time. And sometimes we're trying.
Hey, every TikTok I make is fantastic and performs well and is awesome. And every shirt I make sells millions.
That's right.
That's not. Gosh, I wish. But you know what though? Frankly, here's where I'm going to go to bat for Walt Disney. He needed to see it through. There's some things that are just burning desires that we need to make as creatives and put out into the universe, whether it's successful or not. Sadly, when your business really ebbs and flows on the success or failure, you can't take such major swings, which he took massive swings. And when they paid off fantastically. And when they failed, they were almost under. So,
yeah.
But great risk also can lead to great reward. So, I mean, I feel like he had to do it. And over the longevity, because this isn't a sad story, kids, because over the longevity and the history of Alice, you get this crazy occultic love for it, especially in the 60s and 70s. And it's become a mainstay for everybody. I mean, I still walk into the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World and hear Golden Afternoon played.
Yeah.
It's just it's a true story.
Well, so Alice, like, everybody's always surprised when I say like Walt Disney didn't like Alice in Wonderland, specifically the movie. He did love the character. Like, obviously, he loved the character. He loved the story, but he didn't like the movie. He was disappointed in it. And they're like, but it was such a great movie. Or everybody's like, that's my favorite. You know, how could it be that way? Well, it gained more success. They put a shortened version of it on the Disneyland television show, which was what renewed interest in the IP. Because for whatever reason, put it on that TV show, people were looking at it with a different light by that time. And I feel like people have asked me too, like, well, how come people didn't like it? What was going on here? And I'm like, if you have a book that you know and love, this has happened to us. We have like a Harry Potter series. There was Twilight people, you know, like there's books that we know and love. And when somebody turns it into a movie, sometimes you're just angry because it's just not going to look like the book. It will never live up to what was in your head when you read it. It will never live up to the original. It just won't. It just can't, because they're different animals, right? It's film and books are not the same thing. And I think that so many people were in love and they had grown up with the stories of Alice in Wonderland. They'd grown up with the Lewis Carroll version specifically of Alice in Wonderland, that when Walt Disney released this, they're like, what is this? This is not what I know and love. It's not what I know in my head. It's not what my mom used to read to me before bed. This is not it. And they were upset. And maybe rightly so for that reason, you know, because it was nostalgic. But as we get further out, generations out, people know Disney's movie more than they know the book. That's just a fact. They'll think of Alice in Wonderland, they think of Walt Disney. Alice has actually become fairly popular by a lot of people with that cult following, because they don't know the book first, they know the movie first. And that's a whole different thing. So
yeah. I think you can appreciate the both. I understand where you're coming from and totally agree. I think that's fair.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it is fairly popular now. I think there's still always going to be people that are just like, what is this? This is a crazy, Tony Baxter called it's a collection of curious encounters. And it really is like not a story that has, they tried to frame it into a story that has kind of a, you know, a normal story plot line with a climax and a conclusion and whatnot. But it really is kind of this series of random things that
it's very disjointed.
Yeah. And so it's harder for us to connect with it, I think, as humans for that reason, because we're like, we don't have any reference for going through Wonderland.
That's like watching Alice in Wonderland is how my brain operates. It's just a series of wonderful little happenstances that somehow connect into an epic climax of awesomeness or failure. It's very sad when she's in Tugly Wood. It's very sad. It makes me very sad when she's so sad singing, you know?
It is sad. It's emotional time in that. I think there are moments that we can connect with her as a person, just because she's like, I made some choices and they led me in this path, and now I don't know if I'm going to be able to find my way out of it. And I think that I do connect with that as a person. So I think,
I could mirror that with Frozen 2 and Anna's journey when she loses Olaf. She's in a very dark spot in the bottom of a pit trying to climb out. Like, that is a physical and metaphor for her life. So, and she gains strength from coming out of that darkness. Now, in the instance of Anna, it's really her love and appreciation for Olaf, and then obviously her sister and their journey. For Alice, it just happens to be that she needs a little help, just a little bit of light, and that light comes in the form of a cat.
Well, I think the interesting thing is with Alice, we don't understand her as a person well enough. We don't understand her backstory. We don't understand her family. I didn't even know that the person sitting with her under the tree was her sister. Like, I didn't realize that till
it seems like a teacher.
Yeah,
she seems like a nurse, a teacher. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
You're like, why is her sister talking to her like that and dressed so fancy in a flower bed?
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I don't know. I think because they don't set up her character very well, you know, I think that is partially why we have a harder time connecting with her. You know, in Frozen, we have her set up as a person with a family, with a sister, with her backstory of her losing her parents. Like, we have all this like emotional connection to that. And I think it's a little I'm not, this is not me like, I'm not disappointed. I'm just saying, I think that's why she came off as not sympathetic and a little bit colder, was because we didn't have more of her backstory.
Well, I would argue we define her as a protagonist, We identify that she wants to create her own world. That's her goal. And then the catalyst event for that is that she finds the rabbit that takes her down the rabbit hole. So I feel like thematically they are setting it up. We don't get as much of information of like who, what, when, and why, but we know that she wants to escape. So I view the entire film as a kid and as an adult as a way of escapism. And was it all a dream? Was it not? Who knows? We'll never know. But I think it's clear that she does not want to be defined by the roles that exist currently.
Yeah, that's true.
Scenario.
Now,
in a world of my own.
So ironically, to roll us back into the end here of the discussion about the movie, the film, Alice in Wonderland, even though these kind of like collection of curious encounters was maybe not the best option for film, it actually made it a perfect attraction for Disneyland because of these like short episodic, the nature of these were very like, this is the scene, and then we move to the next scene, and we move to the next scene, and that actually translated really well into an attraction. So are we ready to move on to the walkthrough attraction?
Let's do it.
You got a good version of it. Mine's all pixelated. We're going to go.
Well, you know, sometimes, yeah, you got good picture, you know? No, I do. I actually have really good pictures all throughout this, and I go ham. I found probably one of the most amazing articles, and Tony Baxter's quoted in it for the ride when it officially starts. I don't have as much. I have a lot of concept art for the walkthrough, and I can describe scenes, and we have this overview, but I don't have a lot about specifically what they were trying to build. I know what they were trying to build through the walkthrough, but okay. Do you know what I'm saying?
I've got a fair amount of stuff. So,
okay, cool.
I have a quote from, this was the original description of this walkthrough version. It was, walk through the wonderful experiences of Alice in Wonderland as the White Rabbit takes you down the rabbit hole, through the maze of doors, the rabbit's house, past the singing flowers, Dodo Rock, the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, climaxing the courtroom of the Queen of Hearts. So I have a couple of things for this, where this would have been located before we get into the nitty-gritty details of this. There's actually two options of where it was located. And you can see here that it might be hard for you to see, but if you look on what is the left side of the castle, that's normally where we have Snow White and her adventures, which is what it was in 1955, and then Snow White's Scary Adventures. But right next to that, where Pinocchio is now, it says Alice in Wonderland. So it was going to be one of these four main dark rides that was kind of on the back side of the castle. So there's Peter Pan and Mr. Toad on one side, and then Snow White and Alice in Wonderland on the other.
Can I talk about that for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Through my research, I found that they wanted to, or Walt Disney specifically wanted to have three different types of dark rides when they first opened up. So obviously Alice wasn't a part of that walkthrough. They ran out of cash. But the thought was to have a beautiful dark ride, to have a funny dark ride, and to have a scary dark ride. Our scary dark ride happens to be Snow White, Scary Adventures. Our funny dark ride happens to be Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And then our beautiful dark ride is Peter Pan. I think that was cool.
Yeah. And so this would have been the crazy dark ride. Woo! That was, which I kind of feel like Mr. Toad's the crazy one, quite honestly, but it's funny. So I don't know.
It is funny. It's both. It's a little bit manic.
Can you pull up that high resolution photo of the walkthrough attraction?
Oh, you don't like pixelated pictures?
Mine is terrible. Can you look on the right or left side, pick a side? Do you see where it says Pinocchio walkthrough on one side, and on the other side it says Fantasyland Fantasy Theater, which the Fantasyland Theater is what ended up in that space instead of this attraction, mainly because they just didn't have money to build it. It was too complex. They ran out of time when the park.
Budget and time. That's why you don't get your favorite attraction. Budget and time.
But so that's really interesting to me that they have Pinocchio on one side and Fantasy Theater on the other, because that's different than the prospectus from 1954 that I showed you. So this must have been a later plan than the 1954 one. I'm guessing closer to them actually constructing this. So you have that one. Let me double check my notes here so I'm not missing anything. So I have the actual like scenes, not all of them, but some of the scenes from Bruce Bushman showing what this would look like.
I have quite a few of them as well.
You have them too? Oh, good. Okay.
Yay. I don't have a lot. I have one. I probably have 10. Although there are more. Like I start at number 3. I don't have 2 or 1. They're all labeled. I don't know if you noticed that. They all have numbers to the scenes.
Yes. I have them in order. I also have this one that I think is just a colorized version of that Bruce Bushman. It's the only one I have, so I thought I would just show it. But it shows the table with Alice shrunk, well, not Alice, would be the guest, shrunk down at the bottom with the key up on the table and the drink me bottle as well. But I think it's just like a color version, not of that specific one, but
this shape of the key, remember that. That's going to come back in a little bit, kids.
So let's kind of move through this scene by scene. I do have them labeled based on that overall walkthrough. What you would have had was you'd walk up into the entrance and there was a waiting area there. And then you would go into a tunnel and it says ramps down into.
It says ramps down, yeah.
Yeah, a revolving falling.
This says revolving falling sensation. Yep.
So then we go into the upside down room, which you will actually see that later in our next episode, that part of that does come back. But it is what it says. Things were upside down in that room.
Floor on side wall corridor, and then the right side corridor, and then the diminishing corridor.
So I'm guessing this is diminishing corridor.
We're getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, I think that's where this comes in. This is the diminishing corridor. So what we're seeing is that, again, that table with the key on the top and the drink me bottle, and then there's a series of doors and a long hallway, and that's diminishing into the end of the hallway there.
What's interesting here is you notice that while you head into, you could go 2 different ways. You can either go through the glass maze, or you can go the alternate path, according to this one, which looks like it goes by a sea creature and then off to, you merge together right before Dodo Rock.
Yeah, which is really interesting. Glass maze is very much like Funhouse. You think of Funhouse mirrors.
Here, and you can see this is what the glass maze, and it looks like these are supposedly like movable waves almost as well. This is like this is over the waves, it's called, and there's actually the dodo in the back. So this would be, there's an octopus over here, there's Alice in a bottle, and guests are on these like rocking, sliding, shifting 2 walkways.
Yeah, and then I think that was going over the waves like we see in Alice. She like slides into a bottle, right?
She drinks from the bottle shrinks her. The liquid inside the bottle shrinks her. She falls into the bottle. She rides her wave of tears past various crustaceans, the dodo on the pelican, and then off to the caucus race. But yeah,
you can see her in the bottle in this picture. If you look, yeah, you can actually see a figurine inside a bottle in this particular photo. So it's really interesting. And then they go to the dodo with a rotating platform around it, which looks like people are like trying to keep their balance as they're standing on this maybe rotating platform for the caucus race.
Which is interesting because if you look in the path walkway, the path goes in front of the dodo, not around it. Where in the concept art from Bushman, you are walking around the dodo on like almost like a vinyl record in the way that it's spinning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like this one, the Bushman ones might be a little bit earlier, if I had to guess. And this seems like kind of a hazard to put people on a rotating platform. Not gonna lie, that looks like a lawsuit waiting to happen. So.
No, it doesn't. It looks like fun, Kate. Knock it off. You guys, what are you, like a lawyer? Like, we don't need any of this. We need to enjoy ourselves. Look at how much fun he's having. Look, the kid's like, Dad, help me. The dad's like, woo!
The kid's like holding on for dear life.
Yeah, well, listen, adults need to have fun too. Because remember, as Walt Disney once famously said, the adults have the money. So
that's true. It's true. So after the caucus race, we go down and we see Tweedledee and Tweedledum, who are, they say they're suspended. Yours is like nicer. How come you have the nicer ones?
Oh, well, Kate, I don't know how to tell you. No, I scoured and found the highest resolution ones I could.
No, that's great. So Tweedledee and Tweedledum, which, I think these are really fascinating to see because some of this really did end up in the attraction later in almost a similar form. So then we go on to, after Tweedledee and Tweedledum, we go to, that's your favorite, I think, at this point, yeah?
Yes, we have the oysters right here.
Yeah. So we have...
I don't think I have a concept art with the oysters.
Oh, I do.
I think mine goes... Where do I go next?
I have wobbly steps to Fish Shack, Walrus and Carpenter scene inside, and then a day to night scene with an air balloon moon rises. So they would have had, this is what it looks like, is this Fish Shack. And there's a guy who's kind of walking on some wobbly stairs up to it. You can see a sign that it looks like a fish. It says Fish Shack. And then the kind of like day to night transition as well. So
that sounds about right too. Guy wobbly stairs into a fish shack. His wife standing at the path, looking begrudgingly at him. I don't know who shaded this. Like, what was he thinking?
Oh my gosh. And then it also has. So next is we're gonna head on over to the Rabbit House, which had crazy stairs.
Rabbit House up.
Okay, it had crazy stairs inside lead to a slide on the outside. So you would climb on up from the Rabbit House and then slide down the side. Sounds so much fun, actually.
Yeah, this sounds like a great fun house, an indoor fun house. They'd have to be pretty large to be able to allow adult humans to climb up inside of Rabbit's house and do a slide. This also would be a nightmare for capacity.
Yes, it would.
Because you wouldn't be able to control how quickly people went through the attraction.
Well, I wonder if that's why they added some of those alternate paths, not only for people who didn't want to go on things, but also like if they wanted to bypass people who were taking a long time, like there was options so it wouldn't just get backed up. After that, we see the giant singing flowers. So we've got two figures with some giant daffodils, it looks like, and extra large flowers, maybe a daisy. Look at little flowers there. And then we move on to the caterpillar scene, and it says the caterpillar rises like an accordion and possible smoke rings. So it's a pretty neat scene there.
The kids are very fascinated by it.
On to the Told You Would and a maze. So they had, do you have the giant trees? I have the giant trees.
I do not.
I think they're first. So
because I put mine in order as well. I don't have 9A.
I have 10. So 10 is the giant trees.
Okay, so I have 10. So this is wait, hang on. This is 10A. So I think this happens before. Is that 10?
This is 10.
Okay, so 10 comes before mine. All right, don't look at mine. Mine doesn't exist. Okay, so giant trees.
Giant trees in the Told You Would. So we see a lot of the signs up, down, back, all the random signs. And it looks like the trees are like wobbling at this point.
Yeah, like you could walk through and they probably, how they have those, like not punching bags, but those kind of things. Those are probably what the material of the trees, but just much larger.
They kind of like knock you around a little bit. The trees in the Told You Would, then they had the, what Kirk is showing you, which is the Cheshire Cat in the tree, who then would disappear. So this cat disappears. And then also the Told You Would maze sign as well, which I don't know if I have here. I have one here. This is 11. Yeah, we have the same one.
Yeah, I have that one.
So it looks like a maze in this. You would have to try to find your way around the trees, and there's a whole bunch of different ways to go, and you're not really sure which way. So in that way, it is a maze that you have to try to find your way through. And Maybe
it's very confusing. There's way too many paths in this.
There is.
There are also just subtle things. There's bread and butterflies and rocking horseflies through the woods in the air, which didn't even happen in the animated film. They were in the garden scenes, but for some reason they're in Polgy Woods.
I love the bread and butterflies. Make me happy. And then we see they go into a hedge maze where you do see the painting the roses red on the top there. So you can see some of the playing cards doing that. And I love that it says here, hedge maze, and then it says 12A, scene is knaves paint roses, which, remember, that was from the original book. The knaves were the ones that stole the queen's tarts. So they don't call them playing cards here. They call them knaves, which I think it just ties right back into that original story, which I think is interesting.
What's interesting about this is we didn't have Tea Party art, I don't think I have one.
Oh, I don't know if I do. Let me see.
I have, the closest I have is, do you remember when they did the Mad Tea Parties?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have any Tea Party art from Bruce Bushman.
Okay.
I've got the card maze after that, though. This one's really interesting because the cards are actually soldiers standing at attention, but they've arranged themselves into a maze that you have to get through. And then at the very end is the queen on trial, or not, she's not on trial, but she's presiding over the trial. And it looks like Alice is in there too, which is really important for us to note that Alice is notated in this ride as a character, which, if you know all of the dark rides in Disney, they never had the characters in the original attractions because you were supposed to be the lead character and experiencing the story as if you were Peter Pan or Snow White or whatever. So the fact that they were going to put Alice in the attraction and then they pulled her out, and then we'll see later what happened with her. It's a very interesting thing that was not always from the beginning an idea that, you would be the character necessarily for this attraction.
Yeah.
So after we go through the trial room with the Knave of Hearts, then we go through twin counter rotating barrels, which is such an interesting scene.
That's, again, an old school fun house where the entire exterior will rotate and you could fall on these things. They used to be really fun when I was a kid. And all that's painted on the interior diameter of this barrel that rotates are all the cards. So it's like all the cascading cards kind of coming down on you in this barrel. And that's located right here in this walkway.
Yeah. So it's there are two shows. Sorry, I'm going to start that over. There are two kids, or maybe an adult and a child, looking through this tube. One of them is trying to walk through, but looking like they're going to fall. And then there's another one kind of peeking in. And in the interior is all these illustrations of different playing cards. Really interesting way of exiting that. Kind of like you're coming out of a crazy dream, like Alice in the movie. So, yeah. That is the end of that. And then you go out and back out to the exit through in the same area you came in.
Yeah. It's cool. I mean, all right, so we don't get an official Alice walkthrough until Disneyland Paris. So at least there is some sort of elements of it. It's not to the same extreme. You're not having Funhouse, any of those activations or interactions. There's no slides. There's no physical buildings, except for I think there's one building in the center.
There is a building in the center, and you can go up
through
and
you
have
can go up it.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, because I remember standing at the top of it and like looking over at everything. I feel like I had concept art for that, and I'm trying to find it. But yeah, that we do get that maze really does come back in Disneyland Paris, which I think that they probably did pull a lot of this original concept art out of the archives.
Yeah, why wouldn't you?
Like, let's see what we can use. So if you see,
especially the scenes, I feel like the scenes look very similar. Like the way that they did the Mad Tea Party, the way that they have the hedge maze set up. And Cheshire Cat, no, but the Cheshire Cat's interesting because you can see the Cheshire Cat's body. Can you just, there you go, pan over just a touch. I think that's cool. And then I do like the physical figure sculptures that they have within that maze.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun place, but you can get a little bit lost in it. So you have to just...
It's a maze, Kate. What are you talking about? You could get lost. Bro, that's what's supposed to happen. You can't... That's the greatest line. The greatest. Just in case, you can get lost in the maze. Dude, all right. I have to. I think this is a ludicrous thing to say.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of Distory with Kate and Kirk. We hope you enjoyed hearing all about the history of Alice in Wonderland and this walkthrough attraction that we never actually got. Do you have any final words, Kirk?
I'd rather be riding a caterpillar rather than walking around one.
Yeah, me too. So, fair enough. All right, have a really great rest of your week.